Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this event. I can see that at the bottom of my screen that people are coming in gradually, so I'm going to start quite slowly to make sure everybody has a chance to get in. So the event is a presentation panel discussion on a new EU strategy for the Western Balkans, lessons from EU-CEE, and the Russian invasion. I will be the moderator today. I'm the Deputy Director here at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. We're an institute with a strong specialism on Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, including the Western Balkans. This is a region that we think a lot about, and we are looking forward to very stimulating discussion on the region today. The centerpiece of this will be, or at least the starting point, will be the presentation of a new study that we did on the region that we've just published, looking at what lessons can be learned for EU-CEE in terms of economic development and EU integration from the Western Balkan perspective. The study was done by a number of colleagues and led by my colleague Branimir Jovanovic, who's here, and he will present it today. The study is called The Long Way Round, and it is an attempt to think about, in the context of this very stalled, delayed at least, EU accession process for the Western Balkans, are there ways that certain elements of the accession process can be fast-tracked, even if we know that other parts are stuck? And can there be a new EU strategy for this region in this context, and especially now in the context also of the Russian invasion of Ukraine? So the plan for today is that Hannes Swoboda, our president, former member of the European Parliament, will give an opening address. So I will hand over to him in a minute. Someone who has a very long, very rich experience with all of the issues we'll be talking about today. Then Branimir, as I said, will present the study. He will talk for about 20 minutes to give an overview. And then we will go into the discussion. And we have two other panelists today. We're really happy, really glad that you can be with us. We have Dusan Reljić, who is the head of the Brussels office for the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, someone who we know has been a very prominent, very interesting voice on these issues for a long time. And we also have Ranka Miljenović, who is the executive director of the European Policy Center in Belgrade, someone else who has really a lot of expertise in these issues. And we're very happy, especially also to have see how this all looks from Serbia, which is, of course, a very important element in this whole thing. Unfortunately, the final member of the panel, Stefanie Weiss from Bertelsmann Stiftung, who worked with us on this study, we're very happy again to have done this study in cooperation with the Bertelsmann Stiftung, is ill and cannot be here. We wish her all the best. We wish we could be with us, but unfortunately she won't be today. Finally, a bit of housekeeping, then I hand over to Hannes. Please, we want it to be interactive, ask questions. There's a question and answer function at the bottom. Please type your questions into there. I will monitor them as we go along. I will collect them and pose them to the panelists after the presentation. And I should mention, I think you already saw this, but I should mention that this session is also being recorded. So that was it from me for now, at least. And now I would pass over to Hannes for the welcome address.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, all participants. And thank you for the study the authors made. I had the privilege to read it. I'm very much agree with many points the study makes. It will come immediately. Of course, what can we learn from the experience of the other region? We have first to see what can we not learn, because there are many differences. I think if you look to the region, and there are experts on the panels much more than myself, we have a very peculiarity. This region has been for decades, even for centuries, an object of great power, interest, power struggle, whatever, and finally also of wars. You know, the First World War had the origin in the region. The Second World War had not the origin in the region, but you had, even the same countries, you had perpetrators and you had victims. And so even, which is still, we can see today, even the perpetrators could say they have been also victims, and the victim is much more important for them. Why I mention these elements, and some others I will mention very soon, is that we have to combine what you did in your economic studies and the economic consequences and the economic results together with the political ones to come to an evaluation of the possibilities of the region in a future bigger Europe. And secondly, in the connection with what I mentioned first, we see some countries, some leaders who are looking in the future and other leaders who look into the past. That this is an important element we see now with the Russian war. Russia, Putin specifically, is somebody who looks into the past and wants to regain and reestablish the past of a great Russia. And so if we look to some of the countries, Serbia very much is looking into the past. In some way also Kosovo is looking into the past war and not so much into the future possibilities, how to live together between Kosovo Albanians and Serbs in Kosovo. Northern Macedonia, when it was still not Northern Macedonia, had a government who was looking very much into the past to prove that they are the real Macedonians with Alexander and Philip and so on. So I think this general attitude is not here in the region well enough established to look into the future and to say, well, what could be our future? It's still very much what could have been our past or should have been the past, and should the past be even not a better present than the present we have. We can, of course, go into the details. So a third point I want to mention, because you speak also about money, and I fully agree that more money has to be spent. It's not very justified how neglected the region is, but on the other hand, it's a question of absorption capacity. It's a question of the structural elements and the basic structures, and that is also mentioned in your study, and that is very, very correctly. So I think this is another element where we have to see, can this be changed? Yes, but not with the process we have now, which is not a process. What we have is a stalemate, is some sort of a fragile stability in the region, but there's no real process. Now, what could be done in the future? Just two short remarks. The one you see that Macron, Enrico Letta, and Charles Michel come forward with some ideas how bigger Europe could be established, where all the countries can be included, from the Western Balkans on the one hand, but of course also Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, in order to get this kind of new enlarged European Union, some call it geopolitical union or European Confederation, however you call it. I understand that some fear that this new vision of a bigger Europe means forget about enlargement. On the other hand, of course, you could combine it, and there are some studies on things which are called stage enlargement, that means step-by-step process. Whatever it comes, I think we have to have new movement. Of course, short run, we have to say opening up negotiations with North Macedonia, with Albania, and so on. But I think if we don't come to a new concept of enlargement, and if we don't see visible, clear steps forward, I fear more chaos, more disappointment, more turning away of citizens from the European Union. We speak about enlargement, but there is no enlargement. We speak about accession, there is no accession process at the moment. And therefore, I think we have to combine and have a framing. The European Union must give the region a framing, a framework where they can slowly integrate step by step into the European Union. And here, your economic results, your economic advice, the results of the studies can come in, must come in. But I think we need this kind of new framework. Otherwise, money will perhaps be spent more, but it will not have the effect we want. That means the integration of the region into the European Union. So that's, it's not really a welcome address, but there's some way I wanted to give the second part of the coin of enlargement, which is necessary. The economic is delivered with your study, but we have to put it into a political framework. And I think we should discuss also about these linkages between the economics and politics in order to come forward. So again, thank you very much for inviting me, and I will be here for any comment, discussion, whatever we will have in the next hour or so.
Thank you very much, Hannes, for this very interesting, very thought-provoking remarks, I think, and bringing some very important additional perspectives in. I would turn now to Branimir and ask you please to present the study, and then we go into the discussion.
Thanks, Richard, for the introduction. Thanks, Hannes, also for the excellent foreword, I would say. And thanks everybody else for coming to this presentation. It's really good to see so many people. We were discussing this before the start of the event. Balkans are in general very interesting for everybody, but these days especially. So let me start the presentation. I'll aim to speak for around 20 minutes. And I'll see how we proceed. I'll maybe skip some slides. So basically, I'm presenting the study that we prepared in cooperation with the Bertelsmann Foundation or Bertelsmann Stiftung. And this study is co-authored with several colleagues. So one of the co-authors is Stephanie Weiss, who was supposed to be on this panel, but couldn't for objective reasons. And then we also have some colleagues, several other colleagues from our institute, which are named here: Magdi Gotsi, Richard Grieveson, Doris Hansel-Weiss, Mario Holzer, and Zuzana Zawarska. I want to mention them all because they all contributed to the study. So what's this study about? I'll start with the saying, boldly, let's say, that the current EU strategy for the Western Balkans has not been very successful. And this is just, let's say, a diplomatic way of putting it. And why is that? First of all, because the Western Balkan countries are waiting far too long to start the accession talks sometimes, and not even to mention, not even to speak about entering EU. And I'll show some numbers about this. So for instance, in this table, you can see how much, let's say, the timeline of acceding EU for the Western Balkan countries. And you can see, for instance, that North Macedonia, the country where I come from originally, applied for joining EU for EU membership in 2004, which is 18 years ago, and hasn't even started the negotiations so far. So 18 years, the country is waiting to start the negotiations. And you can see the situation is not very different for the other countries. Albania is waiting again 13 years to start the negotiations. Only Serbia and Montenegro started the negotiations, but they are again waiting for more than 12 years, and they are still not parts of the EU. On the other hand, if you look at the experience of the other, let's say, Eastern European countries or Central and Eastern European countries, which joined the EU so far, we can see that they all entered EU in a period which was less than 12 years. So let's say the Western Balkan countries are waiting more than 13 years and are not even close to entering EU. And all the other Eastern European countries that entered the EU so far waited less, the whole process for them took less than 12 years. We can see, for instance, that some countries like Czechia and Slovenia did everything in just 8 years. So this is really disappointing. And it's not just the only reason, let's say, the only argument that for saying that the EU strategy for the Western Balkans was not very successful. We also have additional arguments. And the next argument is that convergence of incomes in the Western Balkans towards EU levels has been very, very slow. So we can see here, let's say, the income per capita in all the Eastern European countries, that you're talking about, is a share of GDP of EU level income. So we can see, for instance, that some countries from Central Europe, like Czechia and Slovenia, have already incomes of around 90% of the average EU level, whereas the Western Balkan countries are on the bottom of this figure with average income levels of around 30 or maybe 40% of EU levels. So income levels in the Western Balkans are far lower than in other Eastern European countries that joined EU. So this is another argument for claiming that the EU strategy for Western Balkans was not very successful. And then the third argument is that we are seeing already disappointment in the region. And this is some figure from the latest Balkan Barometer, which is still not published, but the director of the RCC of the Regional Cooperation Council announced this figure. So we are seeing in 2022 a decline in the support for EU. The decline is perhaps not very high, from 62% to 60%, but maybe this is a reversal in trend. Maybe we are seeing that people in the Balkans are really getting fed up or disappointed with the EU, and the support will start declining. So with these notions, let's say as a start, we want to assess, let's say, why has the EU strategy for the region failed. So this is something which we are not doing in this study, but we are just discussing. So the main reason why the EU strategy for the region has failed is that it has been conditioned on improving regional cooperation. For instance, EU strategy, the strategy, let's say, of EU for the other Central European countries when they were joining EU was never conditioned on solving regional, territorial, political issues. For the Balkans, it was different. The strategy was always, you have to solve the issues you have among yourself. Macedonia has to sort out the problem with Greece, then, I don't know, Serbia with Kosovo, now North Macedonia with Bulgaria, and then you can join EU. Unless you sort the problems, you're not joining EU. So that was the formal strategy. And the strategy furthermore assumed that in order to solve, let's say, this political, or to improve cooperation, you need to have stronger economic integration in the region. So this is, let's say, the famous Vandal Durkhandel doctrine, if I may say, which means that countries change through trade. If you have greater economic cooperation, you will also have greater other ways of cooperation among countries. And there are many forms of doing this in the Balkans, like bilateral investment treaties, free trade agreements, then the famous Berlin process, then the common regional market, and the multi-annual action plan for regional economic area. So many initiatives. Sometimes it's even hard to remember and to read them all, but the results were still disappointing. You never had anything significant happening out of all this. Why? Because the prerequisites for having, let's say, success in all these areas were never present in the Balkans. So what do we mean here? First, you need to have, in order for this doctrine to work, you need to have some certain institutional preconditions there, which means rule of law, control of corruption, and all other stuff. You know them, I don't want to go into too much details. Then you also have to have some structural preconditions, meaning you need to have good infrastructure between the countries. Income levels between the countries have to be, countries must not have low levels of income. Poverty rates must not be very high, and other things similar to this. Then there also have to be political incentives. For instance, these ideas were never owned locally. So politicians from the Balkans never really drove these ideas for, I don't know, the Berlin process or all the other ideas. They were always imposed on the Balkans from someone from top, let's say, from the EU or someone else. And they're also lacking economic fundamentals, meaning that the region is still too small for let's say, there to be significant economic benefits from improving economic cooperation. So because all these conditions were never in place, this strategy of improving, let's say, regional economic integration, and through that improving regional cooperation, never really worked. So this is like all just introduction to the story. I'm going now to what we're doing in this study. So what we are doing in this study, we are trying to reassess the EU strategy towards the Western Balkans, in which sense we are trying to see how, let's say, to draw some lessons, derive some lessons from the Central European countries that joined the EU for the Western Balkans. So more precisely, we want to see whether EU accession improved regional cooperation in these countries. And we want to see why this happened, if this happened, why this happened. And then from all this, we want to make some conclusions and policy recommendations for the Western Balkans. So basically, we want to derive lessons from the Central European countries that joined the EU for the Western Balkans in terms of EU accession and regional economic integration. We assess three types of regional economic integration. That is integration in terms of export or trade of goods, integration in terms of trade in services, and integration in terms of FDI or investment. And we define all these variables as a share of the respective variable, let's say export in the region, in the total exports that one country is doing. So let's say exports that Czechia is having in the Visegrad region as a share of its total exports. So that's the way we measure economic integration, and we do an econometric analysis in order to assess which factors are driving this integration. We postulate 3 hypotheses for the, let's say, how EU can affect regional economic integration. The first hypothesis is that this goes through income. So the hypothesis says EU accession, is leading to higher incomes in the region, and through that it leads to higher demand for products from the region, or maybe supply of products in the region. And because of that, because incomes are high and demand and supply are higher, then you have greater economic cooperation or integration between the countries. Then the second hypothesis is that this is because of the presence of foreign firms. So when you have EU accession, you have foreign firms that enter the region, and because these foreign firms cooperate between themselves, they are like value chains and all other things related to that, you have greater economic integration in the region. And then the third reason is that this is because of previous linkages, meaning that this can be either positive or negative, meaning that EU accession creates possibilities or opportunities for broken business linkages to be reestablished, or to existing business linkages to extend further, to flourish further. So we want to assess the merits of all these 3 hypotheses, and we do an econometric analysis. Basically, we regress the 3 measures of integration that I mentioned before on various outcomes, and we on the grounds of the econometric analysis, we draw conclusions about the hypothesis that we want to investigate. I'm not showing details about the econometrics, but I have some slides on that. If you have some questions, we can discuss them later on. Now I will move to the results. So the main finding from the analysis is that EU accession has indeed improved regional economic integration in the EU member states from Central and Eastern Europe. And this has especially been the case in trade, both trade of goods and trade of services. Trade of goods and services has increased by around 50% because of the EU accession. So this is a significant, very high increase. And this is not just increase after the EU accession, but this is an increase due to the EU accession. There's a difference between the two. So this is the direct effect that EU accession has had on intra-regional trade in the EU member states from Central and Eastern Europe. Integration in terms of FDI also improved after the accession, but we cannot claim that this was due to the EU accession. It may have been because of something else. So I'm showing you some figures about this. So this figure shows the intra-regional exports of goods for the Central European countries that we investigate, grouped into 3 groups: the Visegrad countries, the Baltic countries in the middle, and the Balkan EU countries, which is Croatia, Romania, and Bulgaria on the right. And we can see 2 time periods before accession. This is the dark red or whatever brown bars, and then the orange bars after the EU accession. And this is in terms of percentage share, let's say, exports that go in the region as a share of total exports for the countries. So we can see that, yes, there is indeed increase in intra-regional trade of goods after the EU accession, and this is especially the case in the Baltic countries. For example, before EU accession, intra-regional trade in the Baltics was around 10% of the total exports. After the accession, 4 years after accession, this jumped to 22%. You can see that there is some increase in all the other countries, but of course, this is descriptive statistics. When we do the econometrics, this effect turns out to be significant and equal to 50% increase. Then if you do, this is the same for the intra-regional trade of services. And we can see that again, there's an increase here. The increase is especially strong in the Visegrad countries and also in the Baltic, not so much in the Balkan EU countries. And this is the integration in terms of FDI. And we can see that the effect here doesn't seem to be that strong. And like I said, we don't find that EU accession has affected this one. So that's the first, let's say, finding from the study, that EU accession has led to improved intra-regional cooperation or economic integration in the region. Then the second important finding is that I mentioned that we want to investigate which of the channels is present. So the second finding is about that. So we see that the dominant channel through which EU accession has improved economic integration in the region is through higher incomes, through the income channel. What does it mean? It means that EU accession has increased incomes in the region, and through this it has increased demand and supply of goods and services, and because of that it has led to higher trade. And here I'm showing how income per capita evolved in all the countries that we analyzed before and after the accessions, and this is the Visegrad countries. You can see improvement, increase in all of them. The same here for the Baltics, the same here for the Balkan EU countries, perhaps to smaller extent, because this period coincided with the global financial crisis, but still there is an increase in income per capita in all these countries after EU accession. Then the third finding, which is very, very important, is that why, let's say, EU has led to higher incomes in the region. And our finding is that this has been because of the higher EU budget transfers. So EU accession was accompanied with higher budget transfers for the countries. And because of that, that has led to higher income. On average, these countries received around 2% per year of their GDP through the EU budget. So that's let's say, sizable amount of money every year, 2% of GDP on average. And because of that, their GDP has increased. Our analysis points out that if the EU transfers increase from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP, that leads to a 14% higher GDP. So that's a very significant effect. So EU transfers are very important for higher incomes in the Central European countries. So I'm showing further a set of figures here. We can see how much money each of these of the Central European countries that are members of the EU have received from the EU budget as an average of their GDP for the whole period, 2004 until 2018. So we can see that the average is around 2% of GDP, but certain countries like Lithuania have received more than 3% of GDP, Bulgaria, Hungary also similarly. Croatia has notably received less, but on average, this has been around 2%. And it's very important to know that these transfers have increased recently in later years. So you can see that until 2008, they were on average around 1% of GDP. And after that, they were more like 2 or 2.5% of GDP. So yes, these countries are receiving high amounts of EU transfers, and because of that, they have higher incomes. So the next, okay, I have to speed up a bit, so I'll jump the next findings, but basically we find that initial conditions were also important, the hypothesis that I mentioned in the beginning. We don't find that foreign firms channel is present. We can discuss that later. So let me jump to the conclusions for the Western Balkans. So the first conclusion for the Western Balkans is that, let's say, well, what we can say on the grounds of what we found for the Central European countries, for the Western Balkans. The first thing that we can say is that the most effective way to improve regional cooperation in the region is through higher incomes, through policies aimed at raising incomes. If you want to improve regional economic integration and cooperation in the Balkans, increase the incomes in the countries. Without that, you won't have sizable effect. The most direct way that the EU can do this, can achieve this, is through higher budget transfers for the Western Balkan countries. One way that the EU can do this is if it includes the Western Balkan countries fully in the EU budget process. So you don't have to grant the Western Balkan countries full membership in the EU. What you can do is include them in the budget and start giving them support as you are giving to the current member states. So let me show you a comparison between how much money the Western Balkan countries are receiving currently from the IPA funds and how much money are receiving the member states through the other funds that the EU has. So this is total accumulated amount of money, and the bottom panel are the Western Balkans. So you can see that on average, the 6 countries are receiving around 12% of GDP, have received in total for all this period, around 12% of GDP. Through the EU budget, whereas the EU member states have received around 30% of GDP, so 2.5 times more. And of course, the figures for the Western Balkans are even lower if you exclude Kosovo, which is a notable exception here. It has received a lot of money, much more than the others. If you remove Kosovo, the other countries are receiving far less. So this is an important difference. You may ask, yes, you can do that, but it will mean paying more from the current member states. Well, not really. here is a calculation of how what would this cost the current EU member states, how much more they should contribute to the EU budget in order to make Western Balkan countries receive the amounts of money as full members. And you can see that the amounts are really negligible. They are all below 0.05% of GDP. The highest here is, of course, Germany, and it should pay more additional to the EU budget of around 0.04% of its GDP. So it's totally negligible. So by paying really small amounts of money additional to the EU budget, current EU member states can make the Western Balkan countries receive the same amounts of money that the other member states are receiving there. And this will have huge impacts on the Western Balkans in terms of their economic development. So I'm slowly concluding. Of course, greater transfers should be accompanied by strict conditions for institutional reforms. So you shouldn't give money just like that. There must be strong conditionality, rule of law, control of corruption, all other stuff, you know them. Then also I have to say that we are not saying that this is not a substitution for fast or full EU membership. Of course, that should remain the #1 option for the region, but we are just saying that until that comes, until the region becomes fully integrated into the EU, then until then you should start supporting the region stronger. You shouldn't, let's say, stick to the current strategy, but you should start supporting the region further. And the last point is that how the war in Ukraine plays out. I would say that the war in Ukraine clearly reinforces all these arguments. Why? Because we are already seeing that, let's say, there are cleavages in the region. And if the EU doesn't show a stronger support for the Western Balkan region, then it opens space that can be taken by other countries. As we could see, let's say, maybe in the last several days, by the, let's say, political processes there, let's say, with the visit of Mr. Lavrov to the region and all other stuff. So yes, the war in Ukraine is just reinforcing our arguments. If you want to prevent, let's say, Russia from interfering in the region or playing out strongly in the region, the EU must show stronger support for the region. So that's all from me. I spoke for 22 minutes, which is, I think, not too bad. So thank you, everyone. Looking forward to your questions and to the discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much, Branimir, for this. I mean, it was a big study, a lot of information. And I think it was quite an achievement to get it all, put it all together in 22 minutes, as you say. So before we go to the discussion, and I encourage you, by the way, already, as you're listening, to start to type your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to ask our other two panelists first to give their responses to the study. So I will start with Dusan. Please tell us what you think. How does it look from your side?
Thanks, Richard. First of all, I'd suggest to everyone to use more than 20 minutes to read this study in full, because it's really an important and excellent study. And I'm pleased that I can participate in this event, because I think it's extremely important that the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, which has a high standing, confirms that the current policy of the EU member states and the Brussels bureaucracy to the so-called Western Balkans is evidently not functioning. I'm also pleased that I'll be in the position today to stir the waters a little bit more, because my firm belief, and Richard alluded already to it, I've said it many times already, is that the structure of the political economic relationship between the EU and the region is producing divergence, not convergence. The reality is worse than, Branimir, what you and your colleagues have described. And I'll try to explain why I believe so. My impression is that in socioeconomic terms, we are witnessing something like a creation of a new Berlin Wall around the Southeast European six, the non-EU member states in Southern Eastern Europe. The population of the region in its everyday life is experiencing that economical and political benefits which were promised politically to them if they adhered to the path to EU membership and NATO membership, that this has not materialized in their life. And people tend to measure their approach to democracy, to the rule of law, and all the positive things that we like to talk about by their individual situation in life. And if things are not improving, if your children have worse perspectives than you had in the socialist times, then there is something wrong. And then you don't support any longer the EU and the model, and then you have sometimes a little bit of positive feelings towards authoritarian rule. And this authoritarian rule, we don't have to look to Russia to find it. It's enough that, with one exception in the Western Balkans, all other candidate countries suffer at the moment from authoritarian rule and the disrespect for the rule of law. So I will ask now Magdalena Höllhuber, our host, to insert a graph, which I hope will convince you that this new socio-economic rule is growing around the region of the Western Balkans. This graph was published yesterday in a study for the European Parliament. The chief author is Matteo Bonomi from the Italian Institute for International Affairs in Rome. And Matteo and I had produced an initial version of this graph approximately a year ago. What it shows is that if you combine the structural and the cohesion funds together with the future, with the recovery funds of the European Union for the next 7 years, you will see that the countries of the Western Balkans, and this is this little dot all the way to the right, are going to have up to 11 times less grants and loans at their disposal than EU member states in the vicinity. So whatever the governments might try to do in the region, they will be like in this famous tale about the race between a turtle and a hare. Simply, if you don't have the money, and I think that Branimir has illustrated this, if you don't have the capital to develop, you can't participate in this race, and everyone else is going to leave you behind. And now, what is, I think, even more depressing in a way, is that this region is more integrated into the EU than many EU member states. For instance, with trade, the region has about 70–75% of its trade with the EU. Germany has less than 50%, and other countries as well. In terms of FDIs and so, the investments come from the EU, mostly 70–80%. And what is really the most important aspect is the human aspect, is where you live and how you relate. And in the last quarter of a century, about a quarter of the population of the region has migrated into the EU. Look at Branimir, look at myself. And this is continuing. We had a look, Matteo and I, at the figures about people from the Western Balkans receiving for the first time a residence permit in the EU for a period longer than 3 months. And this has been, before the pandemic, in a range of about 230 to 240,000 people annually, which, if you break it down, it means that almost every 2 minutes, one person from the region is migrating to the EU. And if you do a little bit of a black humor analysis and add the difference between the newly born and the dead, you will see that the region is emptying with a speed of 1 person per 90 seconds. This brings me to disagree a little bit with Hannes Swoboda about thinking about the future. The population in the region is thinking about the future and coming to the right conclusion. And this is that there is no promise to them that the future will be better than the past. So they are doing the only obvious things, they are migrating outwards. And this is one of the reasons why you don't have a middle class behind. And without a middle class, you can't have democracy, the rule of law. The middle class is not a guarantee that there will be democracy, the rule of law, but it's a precondition. So this is where we are. And will things change? I don't think that things will change, no matter how the new methodology of EU enlargement is called, and no matter if the Berlin process is being prolonged and so on and so on, because there is no genuine win situation for the political elites both in the EU and in the Southeast European six, which they would get from completing the enlargement in Southeast European 3. Why this is so, we could discuss later. I think that we are in a very, very bleak point at this moment.
Thank you, Dusan, for this, well, bleak, as you say, perspective, but I think very important thoughts and should generate, I think, some food for thought for all of us. And I have to say, I think we also see this revolution really in EU fiscal policy of the last couple of years in response to the pandemic as a huge missed opportunity from a Western Balkan perspective. And I think you highlighted that very, very strongly with the chart. I would now turn to Ranka, please, to also give us your perspective on what you've heard, referencing Branimir, of course, also what Dusan said, if you wanted to.
Thank you, Richard, and hello, everybody. It is really a pleasure to be here today to discuss regional economic cooperation and enlargement process and perspective as well, especially in these days when we in Ohrid also witnessed meetings about the newest, I think, regional cooperation that is being initiated. I'm referring to Open Balkan meetings that are happening. For me, it was quite interesting to read this study, and as well as Dusan, I would also highly recommend reading it. But although I fully agree with what Dusan said, I would like to be a bit more optimistic and also to say that both in the recommendations that this study makes and in what we have recently suggested, I see a way to unblock to unblock enlargement process and to maybe move from this enlargement fatigue that we are witnessing in the EU member states and in Western Balkan countries as well. In your study, I found a lot of similarity with something that CEP, together with the partners from the region, but also with CEPs from Brussels, has initiated recently. I'm talking about this staged accession that I think Hans also mentioned in his introductory speech. And I can discuss this stage accession even in more details later on, but what are the similarities that I see in your study as well? First of all, we both of our organizations recommend access to EU funds and to EU budget in early stage. You are more even generous to Western Balkan countries than we are, because we envisage 4 stages to the membership in the EU for Western Balkan countries. And in the first initial phase, we recommend opening of EU budget to Western Balkan countries for up to 50%. Then in the second stage, we recommend that Western Balkan countries are granted with 75% of the access to EU funds, and the full access to the EU budget and EU support would be gained in third and fourth stage. Also, we are fully aware that this access to EU budget should be conditioned with the reforms, institutional reforms, and reforms in the rule of law area. So we additionally envisage even backsliding and reversibility going to the previous stages unless Western Balkan countries make progress or there is deterioration in the fundamentals and the rule of law areas. So this is where I see the similarities in your proposal and what we are advocating for recently. And because of this, I'm saying that I will be more optimistic, because I think that this model has a perspective and can lead Western Balkan countries towards some kind of progress, and can also make our politicians realize that EU is definitely counting on us, and EU sees us as its part and its integral part. And definitely this is something that can also be replicated even for the future enlargement of Eastern Partnership as well.
Thank you very much, Ranka. So I think you gave us a little bit, at least, more of a positive perspective. So I mean, we're happy. You know, it's always better in a debate to have different perspectives. So we're happy to hear these two sides. I saw that some questions are already starting to arrive in the chat, but maybe I would just ask you all one question to start with before we go in a broader question, because we also promised, you know, not only to think about the past and about what happened in the member states, the countries of Central and Eastern Europe that have already joined, and how that applies to the region, but to think also about the war in Ukraine and how that affects all of this. I mean, you've spoken about, in terms of the EU integration, we have these new proposals on staged accession. In terms of regional integration, we have this relatively new Open Balkan plan, which is maybe somewhere competitive to the Berlin process, which we hear maybe being resurrected now as well. So there are new things going on. And then the invasion comes on top of that and the fallout. And Branimir, you've spoken about how much of a cost this could mean for the region in economic terms. So how do you see all of this, you know, these more recent things, these new initiatives on integration within the region with the EU in the context of the invasion? Is this sort of uniformly bad news? Could this be a positive impetus towards faster accession? It would be interesting, I think, to go around the panel and hear your thoughts on this. So, Hannes, maybe we start with you.
Okay. First of all, I fully agree with what Dusan said about the criticism about the EU non-engagement. I'm always in this difficult situation to defend the EU with the Balkan countries and the Balkan countries with the EU. Where we seem to disagree, perhaps it's only a seem. I mentioned the people, but also especially the leadership. If we think about the leadership in Serbia, including the election by the people, or the leaderships in Bosnia-Herzegovina, with all differences, I don't see much orientation to the future. So I think we should also be clear what in the countries themselves should have been made. But my final point and my main point, and this is going also to the question of Richard, is going in the direction that when the study says, and we all agree, more money has to come. More money will come to Ukraine for military expenditure, for reconstruction. More money will go into defense expenditure. More money will go into the energy transition. It is very, very difficult, and it needs a strong and long fight from everybody to get more money also for the region. And final point, also in this connection, and this gives perhaps from my side some answer to what Klaus Pampus is asking, I don't think, and I fully agree with Ranka, I don't see that problems can be solved in the region alone or by the European Union from the outside, unless the countries are not involved in a common project, including also Ukraine, because otherwise we will see a lot of money is going to Ukraine, justified. But the Balkan region will be even more neglected in the future because of the high intention to Ukraine, especially with Poland, with the northern countries and the EU Commission. Now everybody speaks only about Ukraine. This will last for some time. So my big fear is that with justified attention for Ukraine, there will be less attention for the Balkan region, unless they sit on the same table, and unless a process like this stage integration is started. And therefore, we need an institutional framework, not just talks, in institutional framework where we have a step-by-step integration, and where also this money which is foreseen and in the study can be spent, and the political issues can be solved together. Serbia, Kosovo only can be solved together. The stability in Bosnia only together. And this is my major message I want to give. We need this institutional framework, otherwise this neglect will stay on. And as Dusan quite rightly say, those who look into the future, they go already in the EU, and they say, forget my country, I go to the EU. But this is not a solution for the region.
Thank you, Hannes. So I'm keen that we get to the audience questions, but just before we do that, maybe a comment from Dusan and from Ranka on what Hannes said, and just some reflections on these recent developments, how they affect everything that we're talking about.
You know, German Chancellor Scholz is coming to visit the region in 2 days. So a lot of people are asking the question, isn't he busy with Ukraine? Why does he have time all at once to go to the Balkans? Well, my impression is that he is, first of all, trying to point out to those people who are pressing to have Ukraine as at least candidate in a very, very fast speed, that there are unresolved businesses for the EU still around, like the Western Balkans. So he's telling people, before you start pressing us far too hard with letting Ukraine and Georgia and Moldova become member states, let's first finish the unfinished business. He's deflecting pressure a little bit. And I think that Macron and the others are also in this mode. So what we will see most probably on the 23rd of June, when the EU leaders will meet with Western Balkan leaders in Brussels, is a slow movement towards, along the lines which Ranka described, providing more material aid to the region, financial aid. And this is not anything new. Before Bulgaria and Romania joined the EU, 2 years before this, there were special structural funds for them created, which enabled them to develop faster than they would have otherwise. But I really think that this is too late and too little, because the chief problem of the region is the loss of human capital. If you consider that 230,000 people have left just in 1 year, and if 40,000 of them only had higher education, let's try to calculate how much capital has gone to the EU from the region without any compensation. And we have huge trade deficits of the region. The trade deficit of the region with the EU in the last 10 years was 110 billion euros. And this had to be compensated partly by loans, which are being paid back. And now Branimir will help me with this, with inflation and interest rates rising. I'm afraid that the region will not have very much capital at its disposal for development. So altogether, we are beyond the point in which, with the present mode of political relationship between the member states of the EU and the region, there can be genuine change. But again, I have to repeat myself, I don't see anyone drawing the consequence out of it that we have to do the great leap forward with the region.
Thank you. And Ranka, please.
Yes, I fully agree with Dusan that EU is, especially as of February this year, has a feeling that they have to finish what they have already started, but they may not know how. And maybe because of that, it is a time now for some fresh ideas, for fresh approach. Granting fast candidate status to the Eastern Partnership countries would definitely worsen the situation in the Western Balkans with the countries that have already been in the process for more than 12 or 13 years, as we could see from Branimir's slides. So this is definitely why EU has to speed up with the process and has to find a solution how to move forward and how to find a new, as Hannes said, institutional framework to go with the integration of Western Balkans. We do know that the Western Balkan has different problems that brings to the table in the negotiations with the EU, but a fresh perspective and some fresh carrots may be something that can also stimulate the leaders from the region to take firm commitment to the negotiations. And unfortunately to say, but I think that what is happening in Ukraine and the invasion of Russia actually could lead to the benefits for the Western Balkans, because even though the Ukraine is the main topic, Western Balkans definitely is again under the spotlights of the EU, because as Dusan said, they realize that they have some unfinished business at the Balkans too. And for example, the stage accession that we are proposing can be tested with the Western Balkan countries and then can be used as a model and replicate for the Ukraine and other countries.
Thank you. Branimir, I don't know if you want to jump in quickly on this question before we go to the audience.
I might if we have time. So let me, I mean, there are so many things that were said, and I agree with many of those, probably with most of them. Let me just try to reflect on some of the things which captured, let's say, my attention. So Dusan mentioned the visit of Mr. Scholz to the region. There is a joke in North Macedonia that since he's coming to the region, nothing will happen. So he will come there just to tell the politicians, guys, you're doing a great job, but we can't do anything now. We can't accept you to the EU yet. So I think it's there is a sense of how should I say? I mentioned it. I'm just choosing the word. Is it? I don't know what's the right expression. Is it disappointment? Is it frustration? Is it revolt with the EU that the EU is not doing anything actually to the region? And let me make a brief parallel with the visit, with the supposed visit of Mr. Lavrov. So, okay, EU stopped the visit by closing the air, but that's like treating the symptoms. It's not like treating the disease. The EU has to understand that there's a kind of a need in the region or demand for a change. And if that demand is not satisfied, let's say, by the EU, then people will turn to someone else. And it's not only related to Serbia, it's related also to the other countries. North Macedonia is a very similar country. It's okay, it's a member of the NATO, but what we are seeing there these days is clear disappointment by the EU, and people can easily turn let's say, and adopt a different position, and we might see political parties which are explicitly pro-Russian getting huge support there, which might destabilize the region and which might, let's say, create problems also for the EU. And it seems to me that the EU is not understanding this. They are like closing just fires, they are distinguishing fires, but they are not solving the problems themselves, which is, of course, a wrong perspective. What else did I wanted to say? Richard mentioned this about the new initiatives and especially Open Balkan. So I think Open Balkan is again a bit of maybe how should I say, expression or product of this disappointment or frustration with the EU. I mentioned this Balkan process, MAPRIA, common regional market, all the other stuff, which were there for years, but they are always like politicians in the Balkans never really adopted them. They never really felt that they are theirs. But now in 2019, when we had the veto for North Macedonia and Albania from the French veto, we saw this new initiative, which is Open Balkan, which is basically very similar to the previous initiatives of the Berlin process and everything else, but it's not, let's say, imposed by the EU, but it's kind of a grassroots or bottom-up approach, something which evolved or originated in the region, and it's much more successful. You see a strong drive for that. It's been around for less than a year, and we see the third summit in less than a year, which we've never seen with any other initiative there. So it's basically a copy of the Balkan process, but because it's driven by the region, it's not imposed by the EU, everybody is accepting it much more eagerly than the Balkan process, the Berlin process, which was, let's say, imposed by the EU. So it again shows that something is wrong with the, let's say, relationship between EU and the region, and the EU doesn't seem to understand this and doesn't seem to work on solving its problems. Okay, I'm criticizing EU most of the time. You can also criticize the Balkans. I'm criticizing the Balkans not today, but all the time about everything, about their wrong economic policies and everything else. But I also think that in this relationship, the Balkans are not the one who's to blame. They did most of their job. Think about, I don't know, North Macedonia and Albania. They finished all their homework. They did all that was asked from them, and they are not getting any reward. Not reward, they are not getting what they deserve to get. And this is clearly EU's fault, and the EU doesn't seem to understand this. And because of that, I'm afraid that if things don't change soon, things will get much worse.
Thank you, Branimir. I would like to go really to the question and answer now. You know, we appreciate that everybody came to listen to us, and we want to try to answer your questions. I'm actually going to slightly flip them around in terms of the order in which we answer them, because it seems to me the second and third questions we have at the moment rather complement each other. So if I try to combine them, there's a lot in there. I mean, firstly, a question about, you know, a lot of the core of what we've been discussing, the budget and the funding allocation to the Western Balkans. There's a mention of the IPA funds, which have been increased, firstly. Secondly, do we, well, I see Dusan is already shaking his head. I'm just repeating the question. Do we, in the study, Branimir, and for the panelists as well, do we see the Balkans contributing to the budget as well as taking from the budget? I'm not sure how important that would be, but a question to answer. And then the third part, which really links to the second question from Sanya from World Bank, do we see the capacity of the Western Balkans to absorb so many extra funds? Here I see urgent need to work on these capacities. And then the question from Sanya is about institutions, slow integration and convergence. Is that the reason for the slow convergence rather than the EU funds? So there's a lot in there. I think it's really about, you know, is it not the case that the Western Balkans is already getting more money from IPA? Should the Western Balkans contribute itself to the funds? Can it really absorb these funds? And are institutions really not the problem rather than the lack of funds? So there's a lot there. I leave it to you. Maybe Dusan, you can start. I know that.
Yes. To simplify it really, IPA 3 is less money in purchasing power than IPA 2, and IPA 2 was less than IPA 1. I mean, this is completely clear. We don't have to discuss this very much. Secondly, the amount of money that the countries are receiving through IPA is negligible. Let's say Serbia receives 200 million euros per year. This is what a Belgrade municipality can invest. In the meanwhile, these figures have become really marginal. Third issue, whether my good friend Maja Bobic from Brussels is asking whether they should also pay into the budget. The countries are paying into the budgets indirectly. First of all, through producing goods and services for EU companies on a much cheaper scale than the companies would pay back at home. This is why you have so much automotive industry being investing in Northern Macedonia and Serbia, because labor is at 350 euros per month. So if I don't know, Audi is selling its cars to China and parts of it are produced in Subotica, it means that the countries of the region have been integrated in the value producing chain and helped German companies to earn better profits. Secondly, the governments of the region have been providing subventions to foreign companies to invest in the region. So in a way, they have been helping foreign companies to come there, something that usually is also funded from budgets from richer countries as well by providing guarantees and so on. So I'm saying that the countries themselves are in a way providing input to the money which is being made in the West. And finally, so much more things are imported to the region from the EU than exported, which means that through the trade deficits, there is also a flow of money from the region to the EU. So Maya, the countries are actually funding the EU to a certain degree. It's not the other way around, that they depend on the support that they receive from the EU. Second question about institutions. Pardon me for being very direct there. You can't eat institutions. What you need is, as Branimir and the others have pointed out, a raise of income. With a raise of income, people start believing in institutions and support institutions. And to put this issue a little bit further, in terms of in terms of policy outcomes in the region, the countries have been tiptoeing what the EU has been telling them to do, especially in economic policy. Austerity was the issue which was being implemented in the whole region in the last years. So if we are complaining about corruption, about the lack of the rule of law, yes, but in terms of institutional output in policy matters, in the economic policy, fiscal policy, and so on, I don't think that there is reason to complain. So, and if we are afraid that money would be stolen, I think that the European Agency for Reconstruction and Development, which existed in Thessaloniki until 2004, I think, was the way to invest in the region and keep control over the investments and prevent the few stealing from the many.
Thank you, Dusan. I would put this over to Ranka. I mean, there's a lot in there. I don't know if you can answer some or all of it. It's up to you. But maybe, you know, there's the budget question, there's the institutions question.
Yes, thank you, Richard. And yes, for example, Dusan is completely right. What we are getting now is really, really small amount. 14 billion euros for IPA 3. 9 of that envisaged as investment and economic and investment plan for Western Balkans. We still don't know actually what that would be. It is still also a bit vague to all of the actors in the Western Balkans how that economic and investment plan would look like. Although we suggest, and you actually, and your study suggests the additional income and opening of EU budget, I think that there won't be a problem with the absorption capacities because, as Dusan mentioned, what we are receiving now is really a small amount of support. And I would just say that to be fair to all of the countries, to EU member states, I think, and that is what actually our model envisages, that Western Balkan countries also contribute to EU budget, definitely. It should be calculated how much that would be, and we would definitely be net, we would be the difference of what we would receive from the EU budget and for what we would contribute, of course, would be on the side that we would receive more. You know, to have to be at the equal and to be fair for the other member states, we envisage the paying to the EU budget as well. When it comes to the institution, I fully agree with what Dusan said. When people start to have tangible results, and when they see that economically things are improving and that things started to move forward, institutions would also function and people would start to believe more in the institutions. But definitely there should be some conditions and some how to say that, some rules to follow, and every backsliding with the governance, with the improvement in the institutions should be also monitored by the EU and maybe even sanctioned.
Thank you. Maybe one sort of thing that we haven't completely concretely addressed, which I think connects these questions, and I would put it maybe to Branimir, is this point about, even if we agree that we want more EU funds in the region, we decide more money, is there the capacity institutionally to absorb that? And this applies in the EU already. You know, we see that there's in this new EU funds, for example, the COVID response funds, huge expansion of allocation to countries like Bulgaria. But is there the capacity to absorb that money? And isn't that also then tying together these questions about budget and institutions, a consideration in the Western Balkans as well?
Should I go?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, good. So let me first touch some of the previous questions, and especially because I have some concrete answers, for instance, for Sanya. So Sanya, when we did the analysis, we also included one of the variables that we included in the regressions was a variable for the quality of institutions. So yes, we are controlling for the institutions, and in addition to that, so on top of that, income still has some effects. So without going into the discussions that the others started here about the importance of the institutions, income is important even when you control for institutions. So it's not only institutions, it's also income. And also the question from Maya. So the way we let's say commented this in the study about the EU budget is that the Western Balkan countries get full access to the EU budget, which means they act there like they are full members, in the sense they contribute to the budget, but also benefit from it. So that's how we perceived it in the study. And of course, because of the nature of the financing of the EU budget, they will be net recipients. So I think that this is not how should I say, a substantial question, essential question, because it won't make any difference in terms of the outcome. Let's say Western Balkan countries, even if they contribute to the EU budget, they will still get more money, just like every other country from the Eastern European region is getting more money from the EU budget than it's contributing. So we also had this calculation elsewhere, how much, let's see, what is the net contribution, and you can clearly see that the Eastern European countries are net beneficiaries from the EU budget. So I don't think it's changing the story essentially or substantially. And on the absorption capacity, I mean, absorption capacity in the Balkans is of course a problem. Nobody's denying that, but you also have other EU member states which have problems with that. Think about Croatia. I showed the figure. they have less, they have absorbed less funding from the EU than some of the Western Balkan countries. So it's not a problem which is only related to the Western Balkans, but it's a problem which is related to everybody else. And I would also mention that the Western Balkan countries didn't have any big corruption scandals so far with the EU money, differently from many other European countries, EU countries. So that's also an important difference. So you can't say that, I don't know, West Balkan countries will be prone to corruption more than the current EU member states. No, and if you're giving, let's say, that money to the countries for which you know that they have problems in the spending, why you shouldn't give it to the Western Balkan countries? So I don't think that this is an important, let's say, thing which will stop, let's say, or which will go against our argumentation. But of course, I mean, even if they get full access to the EU budget, they won't be able to absorb from the beginning, I don't know, 4% of GDP of EU funding. Perhaps in the beginning that amount will be, I don't know, 2% of GDP, but that's a substantial difference with the current amount, which is less than 1% of GDP. So even if you, with all, let's say, problems in the absorption capacities, if you manage to double the funds that the Western Balkans are receiving, like you had this calculation, their GDP will increase by 15%, which is not a small difference. So this convergence that I was showing before will jump from 40 to 55. That's a substantial difference. So I think that all this is, I mean, nothing of this is basically going against the proposals that we had. So I think that will be all from me in this stage. Maybe the other questions I can touch later on.
Okay, thank you. We had a couple of questions that really directly address the politics, and I would like to finish with a final round, basically looking at these questions, and I will again try to combine them. So there was one from, or I think two questions in one from Klaus Prümpers. The first one draws the parallel with Cyprus joining the EU with an unresolved conflict with Turkey, and the parallel, or as he proposes, a parallel between Kosovo and Serbia. Can we really afford to ignore this problem? And the second part is then about, as long as the EU itself does not solve the problem, to establish a real European Union, or as Orban wants, a European of nations, is enlargement not really very likely? So suppose a question, the EU itself has to decide deeper or broader before going forward with enlargement, or does it? That's the question. And then the other one comes from Andre de Munter, who asks about reconciliation. I haven't heard about reconciliation, which in my view is key. Without reconciliation, or at least the first tangible steps in that direction, nothing sustainable will be possible. The EU disturbingly closes its eyes to this. So I guess that in a way relates to the first question of Klaus Prümpers. So I will put this to the floor. I don't know who would like to go first. Hannes, maybe first.
Yeah, well, to the first question I indirectly answered. Let's be honest. What we have now is this kind of situation that here we have the EU and here we have the Western Balkan. And the study also shows, and I fully agree, that also financially, and what Dusan said, financially they are also quite separated. There's not much support. You can even say there's mutual support, because also going from the country to the budget, or to at least to the economy. I don't think that any of these problems, including reconciliation, can be solved, separately or from the outside. It's the same when you say you should integrate yourself. I was always very critical, and this is confirmed by the study. First, make your integration, then everything is okay, and then we speak about enlargement. This doesn't work. And therefore, I'm very critical also on this open Balkan. I'm not, some meetings, Branimir, is good to meet, but it's not very comprehensive, first of all, and it is not a substitute to EU, as somebody said also in the chat. So again, I'm coming back because we fully agree on the criticism, or I think we fully agree on the criticism with some nuances perhaps, but the question is what to do now. It's not and if the visit of the German Chancellor, of course, there's a general German bashing now. Everybody is bashing Germany, is bad for everything, for the Ukraine war, whatever. But at least the foreign minister already came to the region quite early, and made quite good impression as far as I know. And the Chancellor come. It doesn't mean that everything is now changing, but we should not be so pessimistic. At least Germany, as one of the big countries, is very interested in the region, and does something for the region. Not enough, but Germany much more than France or other countries. So, but we need to solve, we can solve the problems only together. If we say you have to fight, first you have to have reconciliation, everybody loves everybody in the region, then forget about enlargement. It's the same like everybody has to make a big impact on mutual trade relationship. And this is also true, yes, on the Cyprus issue, it's a problem, but we can only solve it together inside the European Union or inside the framework, which has been mentioned also by Ranka, because I think it's much more important to give the European Union a model or some sort of ideas how should things develop in the future. The criticism, which is rightly also in this report, is let's say the must be the basis where you to start to say, okay, what now? How can we arrange it? And I would not diminish too much the institutional aspect and absorption capacity. We should put these things together. We need more money. It's unfair how the Balkans are treated. We need more money. And at the same time, we should give a push to the enlargement process where this more money can also be used, can be controlled, can be observed and scrutinized also by EU institutions, and by giving a possibility to jointly join step by step European Union, be integrated. As Ranka said, also as a model for other countries who are not as far, because Ukraine is not as far as the Balkan countries. So I think this would be very important to work on this issue, how to overcome the stalemate we have now, how to step up the money, but at the same time make it clear it's not money as a consolation for not enlarging. We're not enlarging you, but you get some money. No, we have to both channels, the financial channel, but also the institutional channel.
Thank you. I'll go to Ranka now. So on any of these political points that you'd like to say something.
Well, I would like to touch upon this reconciliation, because that is something that actually is personally affecting me, because I live in the most famous building in Belgrade, the building where actually the mural that Andrej is mentioning was painted, and you could see, because that is definitely something that is being supported by the system, because the mural was painted during the day with the support of the police. So that is definitely something that is telling us that those issues and glorification of war crimes and war criminals is something that is definitely really still very alive in Serbia. And what we have witnessed in those months when that was really a hot topic is actually that the persons who gathered here to defend that mural, and the persons who actually watched over that mural for the ordinary citizens not to do anything with it, were actually children. They are really young men. I would say that some of them even go to high school, and they still haven't. They are under the age, so they are not. They were not even born or planned when everything happened. What is that telling me? That definitely the young people and the children don't see the future, as Dusan said, in our countries, and they don't see that things would improve, and they definitely do turn to the past. But because of that, I think that we have to find a solution, and together EU and the Western Balkan countries should definitely move towards let's not say faster, but more promising steps of enlargement, because we are stuck now in some kind of, I don't know, let's say black hole, because we are not even, we don't know what would happen, but definitely to stop this glorification of war crimes and war criminals, I think that enlargement actually and integration of Western Balkan definitely would be the key.
Thank you. Dusan, to you.
At the end, I'd propose a counterfactual exercise. Let's imagine for a moment that neither Ursula von der Leyen, Baerbock, Angela Merkel, Scholz in the last 6 months had come to the region, and especially to Belgrade, and had said, we are not coming because we clearly see that it's the governments and the political leadership which is actually encouraging regressive thinking about the past, refusing reconciliation, involved in deep crime affairs, and so on and so on. So if they spoke the truth to the people holding the powers in the region, perhaps this would have been more supportive of the enlargement process than continuing with diplomacy as usual. So this would be my contribution to the end of this debate.
Thank you. Okay, so I will give the last word then to Branimir, either on these points or anything else that came up, maybe something that challenged your presentation, maybe even made you change your mind on something. Any final thoughts based on the discussion that we had?
Thanks. So, I mean, I want to briefly reflect on what Hannes said about Open Balkan first, and then maybe the first question that we received. So I'm not glorifying Open Balkan, let's be honest. I have also many criticisms, and we're writing a text with Richard on that one. So I included several critics. And my main criticisms are first that it's very narrow, so it's only like business stuff, mobility of free movement of people, goods, services, and capital. And the Balkans have much bigger economic and social problems like poverty, unemployment, infrastructure, poor education, you name it. And none of these big issues are actually addressed or aimed to be addressed by the Open Balkans. So that's my first criticism. And the second one is, of course, that it's not Open Balkan if you have only 3 countries from the region. It's divided Balkan. So, I mean, let's not glorify it. What I wanted to say is that there is a difference, let's say, in the approach towards the initiative. Since it's not imposed from the EU, but it's, let's say, originating from the region. That's what I want to say. And to me, it shows some, let's say, disappointment or fatigue, I don't know how to call it, in the region from the EU. So when the EU gives some idea, some proposal, then the region looks at it in a different way. Then when the same idea comes from the region, it shows me there's some maybe fatigue in the region from the EU. I agree basically on everything that Hannes said, so let's not maybe spend too much time on it. On the question about solving the issues, especially Serbia, Kosovo, and solving issues from outside, I fully agree that you cannot solve these issues only from outside. There might, but we also have to accept that there should be some support from the outside. So of course, the countries themselves have to talk about that. There must be dialogue and all this stuff that everybody's talking about. But also the EU must show stronger support for that than it is showing now. And speaking concretely about the Serbia-Kosovo question, I'm not seeing any activity there from the EU side. Nothing is in the last year or something, nothing is being done. Previously, you had this Brussels agreement, this dialogue, whatever. In the last year or something, nothing is going on. And this is clearly another failure from the EU side. They cannot solve the issue, of course. Serbs and Kosovars have to discuss this and solve it among themselves. But the EU can support this thing by maybe, diplomatic efforts, talking to both sides, all this kind of stuff. And I'm not seeing that again. And I don't think that we should all wait to solve these issues, territorial and other open political issues, and then to join EU. I think that the process must go together. So we are joining the EU, and at the same time we are solving these issues. That's exactly one of the biggest problems with the current EU approach, that it was saying first we have to solve all the open issues, starting with Macedonia, Greece, the name issue, then also now North Macedonia, Bulgaria with the historical problems or whatever, then probably also other Kosovo, Serbia. That's wrong. That approach is wrong. That puts the countries into the waiting room for too long. That grows frustrations, and it's a wrong approach. So it must be together. So along the way of joining EU, we will solve all these problems, and it will be easier also because people will experience some benefits of the EU, and because of that, they will also that will improve quality of life, that will improve cooperation, and all this kind of stuff. So that would be all from me so far.
Thank you, Branimir. Okay, so we've come to the end of our time. We've been here for an hour and a half. It never feels like enough, especially when we're discussing Southeast Europe. There will be a lot more to say on this for sure. I would like to say thank you very much to our speakers. We really appreciated having you here, sharing your expertise. I think it was a really good discussion, very stimulating thoughts. Thank you to Branimir for the presentation. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. I hope we answered most of them. I think we touched at least on all of them. Thank you to our colleagues Magdalena, Veronica, who did a great job in the background. There's a lot of work goes into organizing these events. We very much appreciate it. The study that Branimir presented, you can download. The link has been put in the chat. Please download it. If you have questions, comments, get in touch. And we look forward to seeing you, I hope, at a future event. We're doing more now in person again, but we still keep going with these online events as well. So for those who are not in Vienna, we hope to see you online soon. For those who are in Vienna, well, we also hope to see you in person soon. So thank you very much. And also from my side, goodbye.
All right.